Chief Peter spent 40 years building a name that would outlast him, and chose the one architect who would quietly demolish it, brick by brick, while his real builders were left kneeling on the driveway with their suitcases split open and their prayers still warm in their hands. The story opens on the evening everything broke, in front of a house that was never truly a home. The driveway of Chief Peter's compound is paved and wide and lit by the kind of exterior lights that say we have arrived to everyone passing on the street. It is a house built for appearances. Tonight, its appearance is this: a man in a red shirt pointing one rigid finger toward the gate, and two young girls on their knees in matching yellow, their palms pressed together in a plea that has already been decided against. Their luggage has been thrown. Not placed. Thrown. The suitcases lie cracked open on the paving stones, clothes spilling out in colors too bright for this moment, a child's dress, a school exercise book, a pair of small sandals that landed apart from each other. Chief Peter does not look at the sandals. He is looking at the gate. At the street beyond it. At the future he has decided will be better than this one, cleaner, more useful, more worthy of the title he carries and the name he is terrified of losing. The girls are begging. Their mother, Ngozi, stands just behind them, not begging. She is past that. Her face holds the expression of a woman who has understood something tonight that she will spend 20 years turning into fool. Chief Peter hears none of it. In his mind, he is already somewhere else, in a different house, with a different wife, holding a son. A boy who will sit behind his desk when he is gone, who will carry his name into the next generation, who will make the sacrifice of this moment, this necessary moment, worth everything it is costing. He does not know, standing on that driveway with his finger still pointing, that the sacrifice is not what he thinks it is. He is not sacrificing his daughters for his legacy. He is sacrificing his legacy for his ego. And the two girls in yellow, kneeling on his imported paving stones with their hands pressed together and tears on their faces, will spend the next 20 years proving the difference. This is not a story about a man who failed. It is a story about what rises from the ground where a man plants his failures, and what comes back, carrying his name, to show him exactly what it was always worth. The baby was born on a Wednesday, which Peter's mother had always said was a good day for beginnings. He stood outside the delivery room with his hands in his pockets and his jaw set in the particular way of a man who has already decided how he will receive news before the news arrives. When the nurse pushed open the door and said, "Chief, you have a beautiful baby girl," he nodded once, slowly, as though she had told him something he was not surprised by and was not going to celebrate. He went in. He looked at the child, Jessica, though he did not name her that day. Ngozi would name her, as she had named the other two, because Peter found it difficult to name things he was not keeping. The baby was asleep. Her fingers were curled. Her face had the particular dignity of the newly arrived, utterly unaware that the room she had entered was cold in ways that had nothing to do with temperature. Ngozi watched Peter's face from the bed. She had watched his face at Tina's birth, and again at Queen's, and she had learned to read it the way you learn to read weather, not to predict sunshine, but to know when to bring the children inside. He looked at Jessica for 11 seconds. She counted. Then he put his hands back in his pockets and walked to the window. 3, he said. To no one, or to the window, or to whatever accounting system he kept inside himself where children were tallied and assessed and found sufficient or wanting. Peter. I need a son, Ngozi. The words fell into the room without drama, which was almost worse than if he had shouted them. Matter of fact. Conclusive. A business decision delivered at a bedside, while his third daughter breathed her perfect new breaths in a plastic hospital crib 3 feet away. Ngozi said nothing. She looked at her baby. She memorized, in that moment, the exact weight of what had just been decided, not stated, but decided, and she fired it somewhere deep and useful. Jessica slept through all of it, her fingers still curled, her face still dignified. She would sleep through his indifference for 3 more years. Then she wouldn't have to. The suitcases had been packed by Peter's housekeeper, which meant they were packed efficiently and without sentiment, clothes sorted by size, toiletries in a plastic bag, nothing extra. Ngozi repacked them herself that morning, before the sun was fully up, removing the efficiency and replacing it with something else, a photograph tucked between Tina's school dresses, a small Bible slipped into the pocket of Queen's overnight bag, Jessica's favorite soft toy pressed into the corner of the largest case. She did this quietly, while the girls slept, and when they woke she dressed them in yellow, not because yellow was their favorite, though it was, but because she needed to see them bright. She needed to look at them and see something the house had spent 3 years trying to make invisible. They understood more than Peter believed children understood. Tina was 9. She had been understanding things for years. She held Queen's hand on the driveway and did not cry, which was the most heartbreaking form of dignity Ngozi had ever witnessed in another person. Queen was 7 and wept openly, palms pressed together, her plea wordless and complete. Later, many years later, she would say she had not been begging her father to let her stay. She had been praying. She had decided, at 7, that her father's heart was beyond her reach, and so she had aimed higher. Jessica was 3 and did not understand the driveway or the suitcases or the rigid finger pointed at the gate. She understood only that her mother's hand was very tight around hers and that the man in the red shirt was not going to wave goodbye. He didn't. The gate closed behind them. The taxi Ngozi had called from a neighbor's phone was waiting on the street. She put the girls in first, arranged their seatbelts with steady hands, and then stood for one moment with the door open and looked back at the compound, the lights, the paving, the house built for appearances, and made a decision. She was not coming back to beg. She was not coming back at all, except on her own terms, in her own time, when the ground had shifted sufficiently to make her return the kind of arrival she intended it to be. She got in the car. The driver asked where they were going. "Forward," Ngozi said. He waited for an address. She gave him one, her sister's place in the next town, a small house with a veranda and no room to spare and more love than Peter's compound had held in a decade. The girls watched the lights of the house disappear through the rear window. Tina's hand tightened around Queen's. Jessica pressed her soft toy against her chest. None of them looked away until there was nothing left to see. James arrived 14 months later, and Peter wept. Not quietly. Not privately. He stood in the hospital corridor and wept with the full-throated relief of a man who believes he has just been saved from obscurity, from irrelevance, from the particular cultural shame of a titled man without a male heir. He called his brothers. He called the palace secretary. He called his eldest friend from university who had always privately questioned his choices, specifically to prove him wrong. "A son," he said, into phone after phone. "I have a son." The naming ceremony lasted 3 days. 3 days of food and music and palm wine and congratulations from men who had watched him send a wife and 3 daughters into the street and had said nothing, who now stood in his compound celebrating the validation of a decision they had privately called inevitable. James was given a room that was too large for a baby and furnished in a manner that suggested Peter had mistaken infancy for kingship. He was carried constantly. He was held by everyone and denied nothing, which is a way of teaching a child that the world is his table and other people are its staff. His mother, Adiz, Peter's new wife, watched this with a quiet pride that had, at its edges, something more calculating. She had produced the desired result. She understood that her position was now secure in a way it had not been before James arrived, and she arranged her life accordingly, close to Peter, close to the money, close to the power, and careful, always careful, about the particular secret she had been carrying since before the wedding. Peter noticed none of this. He was too busy watching his son grow. James walked at 13 months and Peter threw a party. He spoke his first words at 15 months, mine and no, in that order, and Peter called it brilliance. He started school and lasted 4 months before the first complaint from a teacher reached Peter's desk, describing incidents of cruelty towards smaller children, food taken, a girl's project destroyed. Peter filed a complaint in the place where men like him file inconvenient truths. The rubbish. James was still his son. His heir. His bridge to the future. The bridge was already cracking at the foundation, and Peter was standing on it, looking the wrong direction, certain he had never been safer in his life. There is something particular about watching a man refuse to see clearly when all the evidence is in front of him, not because he is stupid, but because the truth would require him to grieve a choice he is not ready to regret. If Ngozi's story has moved you at all, if you have found yourself quietly rooting for those 3 girls in yellow, stay. The women they become are worth every chapter. Ngozi wrote the first letter when Tina won the regional mathematics prize. She wrote it by hand, on the good paper she kept in a tin under her bed, the paper she used for important things, rent receipts and the girls' school forms and the loan documentation from the cooperative society she'd joined in her second year alone. She wrote carefully, in the penmanship that her own mother had spent years demanding she perfect, and she described Tina's award in precise and unboastful detail, the name of the competition, the number of entrants, the size of the prize, the expression on Tina's face when her name was called. She signed it Ngozi and the girls and sealed it and sent it to Peter's compound address with a stamp she could have used for something else. She did not expect a reply. She sent it anyway. The second letter came 6 months later, when Queen won a writing competition at her secondary school. 3rd place, but 3rd place in a field of 200 students, and the essay was about a woman who built a city with her bare hands, and the teacher had written in the margin, "This child has a gift." Ngozi copied the teacher's comment into the letter word for word. She sent 8 letters over 4 years. Tina's prizes. Queen's scholarship. Jessica's remarkable facility with numbers that her teachers said they had never seen in a student so young. Small achievements, then larger ones, then achievements that would have made a different kind of father put the letter down and go very quiet with the weight of what he had thrown away. Peter burned them. Not from cruelty, exactly. From a particular psychological mechanism that functions as self-protection. If the information doesn't enter, the reckoning doesn't begin. He would hold each envelope for a moment. Ngozi's handwriting was distinctive, and some part of him always recognized it, and then he would burn it in the kitchen, over the gas ring, quickly. He told himself the girls were probably ordinary. That Ngozi was exaggerating, as mothers do. That the letters were a manipulation, an attempt to make him feel guilty for a decision he had made with clear eyes and a full understanding of his priorities. He told himself this every time. He burned the letters. He went back to James. He did not know that each letter he burned was also a brick, that Ngozi had been cataloging his silences, and that the catalog would one day become architecture. The last letter arrived on a Thursday. It contained, along with the usual news, a single additional line at the bottom, in smaller writing than the rest. "We no longer need anything from you. But I wanted you to know what you chose not to see." He held this one longer than the others. Then he burned it. James came to him on a Sunday with a business plan printed on thick paper and bound in a plastic cover, which Peter would later realize was the most professional thing about the entire proposal. He was 22. His eyes were clear in the way that good liars' eyes are clear, direct, untroubled, carrying none of the weight of what they know and are not saying. He sat across from his father in the study that had once been Peter's pride, surrounded by the certificates and photographs that constituted a man's public record of himself, and he presented the plan. Import business. High-end goods. A partner already identified, a warehouse location already scouted. All that was needed was startup capital, which James had calculated at a figure that made Peter's left hand tighten slightly on the arm of his chair. "That is a significant amount," Peter said. "It is a significant opportunity," James said. Peter looked at his son. At the suit that had cost more than Peter remembered spending on it. At the watch that had appeared on James's wrist 6 months ago with no clear explanation. At the particular quality of James's stillness, which was not the stillness of patience but of practiced performance. He looked at all of this and did what he had been doing for 22 years. He chose the explanation that required the least grief. The ancestral land in the eastern compound, Peter said slowly. If we were to sell the back portion, the whole parcel would give us better leverage, James said. No pause. No apparent awareness that what he had just suggested was the equivalent of selling a piece of his father's name, the land that had been in the family for 4 generations, the ground his grandfather was buried adjacent to. Peter signed the papers 2 weeks later. The money was transferred to a joint account James had set up, joint in name, single in access. Peter discovered this 14 months later, when the business had produced no returns and James had stopped discussing it, and the account showed a balance of 11,000 naira, which was approximately what it cost to fill a car with fuel. By then, the land was gone. By then, Tina had graduated with distinction from medical school. Peter did not know this. He had burned the letter. The illness came quietly, as serious things often do. It started as fatigue, the kind Peter attributed to age, to stress, to the particular heaviness of a man who has spent 2 decades not sleeping as well as he once did. Then came the pain, which he also attributed to age, and then the episodes that could not be attributed to anything comfortable, and by the time he saw a doctor the news was the kind that reorganizes a man's priorities instantly and without negotiation. He needed surgery. Complex surgery. The kind available only in facilities his current financial situation, gutted by years of James's extractions, could no longer support. He called James. The first call rang out. The second went to voicemail. On the third, James answered, and his voice had the particular texture of a man who has been rehearsing this conversation and has decided it will be brief. I'm in Dubai, James said. There's nothing I can do from here. James, I'll send something when I land. He did not specify what, or when, or which landing. He hung up. Peter sat in the room James had moved him into 18 months prior, smaller than any room Peter had inhabited since childhood, in the back section of what had once been a tenant's quarters on a property Peter no longer owned. He sat and looked at his phone and waited for a call back that did not come. James did not land. Not anywhere Peter could reach. He had taken what remained of Peter's accessible accounts, the fact Peter discovered when his bank card failed at the pharmacy, and he had gone somewhere expensive and distant where a man of his appetite could comfortably disappear. Peter spent 3 days in that room with his phone and his illness and the slow, architectural collapse of every certainty he had built his life upon. The neighbors, tenant farmers on adjacent land, people who remembered when Chief Peter's compound had hummed with activity, brought him food. Old women who owed him nothing. Men who had no particular reason to be kind. He ate what they brought. He said very little. On the 4th day, he was too weak to eat at all. On the 5th day, he heard a sound above the compound that he had never heard there before, the percussive, mechanical rhythm of a helicopter, descending. The pilot touched down in the field behind the compound with the practiced ease of someone who had done this in tighter spaces and worse conditions. 2 people in white uniforms came through Peter's door 12 minutes later, a man and a woman, both young, both carrying equipment, both moving with the particular brisk competence of people who are not there to chat. The woman checked his vitals. The man set up a portable drip with a speed that suggested he had done it in moving vehicles. Who sent you? Peter asked. His voice came out smaller than intended. Sovereign Heart Center, the woman said, without looking up from the blood pressure monitor. You've been registered as a priority patient. We're here to transfer you. I didn't register. It was done on your behalf. She met his eyes briefly. Sir, your condition is urgent. We need to move you now. There will be time for questions when you're stable. He wanted to argue. He was Chief Peter. He had spent 40 years arguing from positions of authority, demanding explanations, insisting on the dignity of a man who was owed information. He was lying on a cot in a tenant's room with a drip in his arm and the strength of a much older man. He let them move him. The neighbors gathered in the compound as the medical team carried him out. Peter looked at their faces, worry, relief, the genuine care of people with no obligation to feel either, and felt something shift in his chest that was unrelated to his medical condition. The helicopter lifted. Peter looked down at the compound shrinking below him, the house that had once been a symbol of everything he'd achieved, the gate he'd pointed his daughters toward, the driveway where two girls in yellow had knelt on his imported paving stones. The driveway looked very small from this height. He turned his face away from the window and stared at the white ceiling of the medical compartment and thought, for the first time in 20 years, about a letter he had burned without opening, and what the handwriting on the front had looked like, and how he had always known it immediately, Ngozi's penmanship, taught to her by her mother, architectural and precise. He thought about how many times he had recognized it. How many times he had lit the match anyway. He woke to ceiling tiles that were the color of corn. Not white exactly, cream, or something close to it, the kind of considered color that communicates healing without announcing itself. The room was large and quiet. The equipment surrounding him was more sophisticated than anything he had seen in the provincial hospital where he'd received his diagnosis, and it was silent in the way that expensive things are silent, functioning without effort, requiring nothing of the space around it. A nurse materialized at the doorway. Young, professional, unhurried. "Good morning, Chief. You're in the Sovereign Heart Center. You've been stable for 14 hours. The medical director will be in shortly." Peter looked at the ceiling. At the room. At the quality of the light coming through the privacy glass of the window, which was the light of a building that faces east and was designed to receive the morning fully. "What is this place?" he asked. "The premier cardiac and surgical center in West Africa," the nurse said, with the quiet pride of someone who is genuinely glad to work where they work. "Full ICU capacity, 16 operating theaters, regional air transfer services." She straightened the monitoring cable on his arm. "You were brought in critical. You're going to be all right." He looked at her. "Who is paying for this?" She smiled, the calibrated smile of a professional who has been asked this question before and knows the answer is not hers to give. "The attending team will speak with you." She left. Peter lay in the quiet and took inventory. His body felt different, lighter in some ways, heavier in others. The pain that had been structural for weeks had receded to manageable. The drip in his arm was feeding him something that worked. He thought about James. About Dubai. About a phone that had rung and eventually been answered by a man whose voice said, without saying it, "I am already gone." He thought about the land. 4 generations in a family, gone in a signature. He thought about the room in the tenant's quarters, and the neighbors who had brought him food, and the sound of a helicopter he had not called and could not have afforded. He thought about the name on this building, Sovereign Heart Center, and the question he had not yet been able to ask, which was, whose sovereign? Whose heart? The door opened. 3 women walked in. He knew them immediately. Not from photographs, he had burned anything that might have become a photograph of them. Not from memory exactly, because memory requires attention and he had spent 20 years practicing inattention. He knew them the way you know something you have always known and spent considerable effort pretending otherwise, from the inside, from the irreducible biological fact of recognition that moves faster than thought. Tina was first. She was wearing a white coat over her clothes, with her name on the breast pocket and a lanyard that said Chief Medical Officer in letters that required no magnification to read. She was tall. She held herself the way Ngozi had held herself on the driveway, not arrogantly, but with the specific uprightness of a woman who has been carrying weight for a long time and has made peace with the carrying. Queen came in behind her, in a structured jacket and the posture of a woman accustomed to rooms that become quieter when she enters them. She carried nothing. She needed nothing. Jessica came last, smallest still, but the way she moved through the door made the room feel organized around her presence. She was wearing surgical scrubs. There was a stillness to her face, not coldness, but precision. The face of someone who has spent years learning not to let their hands move until their mind is certain. Peter's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Tina spoke first. Her voice was measured. Not unkind, but not warm, the voice of a woman who had decided, carefully, how this conversation would be conducted. Your surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning, she said. Dr. Jessica will perform the primary procedure. You are in good hands. He looked at Jessica. At the daughter he had not named. Who was going to open his chest with her own. I need you to understand where you are, Tina continued. This facility was founded 7 years ago. Quinn manages the group's financial operations. I run clinical services. Jessica handles surgical intervention. The silence was enormous. Who funded my transfer? Peter asked. Though he already knew. Though some part of him had known since the helicopter. Quinn looked at him. Her eyes were their mother's eyes, steady, containing more than they revealed. Mama knew you were ill, she said. She has known for some time. She asked us to bring you in. Ngozi is well, Quinn said. She built well, when you gave her nothing to build with. The room held a particular silence of a truth that has finally landed in the correct place after a very long journey. Then Jessica, who had not spoken yet, who had been watching her father with the focused attention of someone assessing a patient and something else simultaneously, said quietly. There is one more thing you need to know. About James. She set a document on the bed beside him. A medical report. The relevant section was brief and clinical and as destructive as anything Peter had experienced in his 71 years of life. James was not his biological son. Addis had known before the wedding. The deception had been clean and complete and had cost Peter everything he had given it. He looked at the document for a long time. Then he looked at his daughters, the 3 women standing in a room they owned, in a building they had built, who had come, without being asked to come, to save the life of a man who had pointed his finger at a gate and told them they were not enough. He had no words adequate to the moment. He was not sure he ever would. Some stories, when you reach their hinge point, ask you to sit with the discomfort rather than rush past it. Peter deserves to sit with this. So do we. If this story has reached something in you, if you know someone who has carried their parents' dismissal into their greatest achievements, share it. Some stories need to find the right people. The surgery took 4 hours and 20 minutes. Peter knew this afterward because Tina told him, clinical, precise, a debrief delivered with the professionalism of a woman who has separated her medicine from her grief and keeps them in different rooms of herself. Jessica had performed the primary procedure without complication. His heart, she said, was structurally sound. The damage was addressable. He would recover fully, with compliance. He lay in recovery and thought about his heart being structurally sound. He thought this was, perhaps, more than he deserved. Ngozi came on the 3rd day of his recovery. He had not asked for her, he did not yet have the right to ask for anything, but she came because she had decided to, which was consistent with everything she had ever done. She was 63. She walked into the room without drama, sat in the chair beside his bed, and looked at him with the eyes of a woman who had finished grieving a long time ago and arrived at something on the other side of grief that was quieter and considerably more permanent. Ngozi, he said. Peter. He had prepared things to say. In the 3 days before her arrival, in the long hours of medicated quiet, he had assembled words, apologies, explanations, accountings of all the letters he had burned and the specific cruelty of burning them unread, the land, the daughters, the 20 years. Sitting in front of her, the words felt small against the size of what they needed to carry. I don't have language for it, he said finally. I know that's convenient. I know it sounds like another way of avoiding the weight. He stopped. I burned your letters. I know, she said. All of them. I assumed. I didn't read a single, his voice caught. He was surprised by this. He had believed, coming in, that he was beyond the specific vulnerability of tears. He was wrong. They built all of this, he said. Tina. Queen. Jessica. They built it despite you, Ngozi said. Not because of you. That distinction matters. Yes, he said. It does. The room was quiet. Outside, through the glass, he could see the hospital functioning, nurses moving, families gathered, the ordinary business of survival going on with the efficiency his daughters had created. My name, Peter said slowly. I spent everything to carry my name forward. He looked at the window. At the sign visible at the end of the corridor, Sovereign Heart Center, and beneath it, in smaller letters, the foundation name. He had read it 3 times before understanding it. The Ngozi Peter Foundation for Accessible Cardiac Care. She had used his name. She had taken the name he tried to protect and built it into something that would outlast him in ways he had never imagined, in ways that had nothing to do with sons. You kept my name, he said. I kept it for the girls, Ngozi said. Not for you. They are your name, Peter. They always were. He looked at his hands. At 71 years of choices concentrated in a pair of hands that had signed warrants and bond letters and pointed at gates. I need to ask their forgiveness, he said. I know I am not owed it. I know they may not give it. I am asking anyway. Ngozi stood. She straightened her clothes, the same composed, unhurried movement he remembered from the driveway, 20 years compressed into a single gesture. Then ask them, she said. They are your daughters. They will decide. She walked to the door. Paused. They are extraordinary women, Peter, she said, not cruelly, not triumphantly. Simply, as a fact that deserved to be spoken plainly to the person most responsible for almost missing it. I know, he said. The door closed. He sat in the room his daughter had built, in the hospital bearing his name, kept alive by the child he had not bothered to name, and he began the slow and irreversible work of understanding what legacy had always meant, and what it had cost him to learn it this late, in this room, at this price. Peter's story ends here, but the daughter's story was never waiting for his chapter to close, it was being written all along, in the margins of his indifference, in the spaces his letters never entered. If this found you at the right moment, if it said something you needed to hear about what an inheritance and the names we give to love, carry it with you. Subscribe, if you want more stories that refuse to let the wrong people have the last word. The right people have been waiting a long time for their turn,